Hello everyone and welcome back to another updated Warframe guide. Today we are going to talk about one of the most broken Excalibur builds in Warframe. Take note that I'll be showing a normal build for this guide using the million damage combo and as well as an exalted blade version of this build. Then I will be discussing on details how to boost the damage of Excalibur to hundreds of millions and as well as future proofing this build for the upcoming Technosite Anchor update releasing this March. So let's cut any long introduction and begin this guide, starting with the basic of this combo. Now, this new Excalibur build can be used by any variant of the Warframe, but I strongly recommend using the normal variant over the Umbra version if you are saving Forma. This is because in the Exalted build, we won't be needing the sacrificial mods, and you all know that the Umbral version of Excalibur has built-in Umbral mods in both the Warframe and his Exalted weapon. For this synergy, we will be relying on Furious Javelin to boost the damage of our melee weapons to insanity. By the way, I have a Limbo build with the same concept for this Excalibur build. You can watch it later, but for now, let's focus on the Excalibur build. I brought this up because Limbo has the same augment that increases your damage. The only difference is Excalibur's Furious Javelin is more powerful, but Limbo's Rift Torrent is more versatile as it works with any weapons in the game. The Furious Javelin augment, on the other hand, only works for melee weapons, but it does give you better damage boost even if you are getting 800% or lower damage boost from the augment. In comparison, Limbo's Rift Torrent will need to hit 2k or even 4k damage boost to hit those millions of damage. The reason behind this is because Furious Javelin works like Mirage Eclipse ability that is multiplicative to all other forms of damage increase. Now, I don't want to bore you with numbers and math, but in general, using the same melee weapon with the same slam build will give Limbo a max damage of 200 million, while using Excalibur's Furious Javelin will deal 800 million damage at max and potentially can go to 2 billion mark with more power strength or boost from outside sources. When I say outside sources, this means that you can further increase the lethality of Furious Javelin build by subsuming abilities such as Rhino's Roar, Mirage Eclipse, Grendel's Nourish, or even Kalervo's Wrathful Advanced skill. Rhino's Roar will provide a double dipping effect to whatever damage over time element you have in your build. For example, if you have Toxin in your melee or Exalted Blade, then this damage will double dip and provides greater final numbers. In the case of Nourish, it will give insane damage bonus to health, and for Eclipse, you will gain another multiplicative source of damage which adds to your final damage output. Finally, Wrathful Advance can give you a flat 300% critical chance bonus if you have enough power strength in your build. The red crit is nasty, especially if you have tons of critical damage boosts in your setup. And there are instances wherein you can pull off 2 billion damage against Steel Path enemies. The only downside with adding damage boost into the build is you'll be sacrificing a lot of survivability. In all of my builds, I always aim to make them work in Steel Path levels. I always make sure that my builds can do even Elite Deep Archimedia or against Steel Path bosses in the game. With this in mind, I sometimes sacrifice more damage to put enough survivability so I won't get knocked down even once in every mission that I do in Warframe. This is why instead of adding one of the recommended damage boosting abilities, I decided to go with my trusty Omamori Subsume ability that provides a budget Mesmer skin effect. This skill with the shield gating mechanic allows my Excalibur to be on his feet from start to finish of all missions in the game. So this is the final build for the general purpose Excalibur. Since we will be spamming slam attacks, I ended up adding these two Nira mods to further increase my damage output. This build uses slam hammers to deal massive damage to enemies, and since I don't have any channeling ability active while using this setup, I decided not to use Arcane Energize to fully grasp the opportunity to further boost my damage with Molt Augmented. A quick tip though before we proceed to the Exalted Blade variant, take note that Radial Javelin does need line of sight to hit enemies. This means that only those enemies that are seen by your character will be hit by the Radial Javelin ability. Those enemies that are behind cover will not be affected, which is one of the main concerns I have while using this build. It's not really a big problem though, as the damage boost of Furious Javelin is really big and it lasts for a couple of seconds before I need to cast my third ability again to get the damage buff. To always get huge damage boosts, I also added Magus Anomaly in my operator so I can pull enemies within 30 meters. You can also add the Nautilus Sentinel with its Cordon Mud precept that also pulls enemies within 30 meters. In fact, range won't be that much help if you have either Magus Anomaly or Nautilus to pull targets towards your location, and you can use any mod that you like on this slot. Anyway, the base range of Radial Javelin is 25 meters, which is decent enough to hit enemies if you pair it with a grouping mechanic. You can also use a Mecha Set mod combo on this build to boost your survivability. This is great when paired with the Exalted Blade variant, which we will discuss later, but in general, the Mecha mod set adds nuking with Mecha empowered if you have the damage types like Toxin or Hit in your melee weapon. Then, it will boost your survivability through armor bonus using the effect of Mecha Pulse. For the companion, it's perfect to use the Huras Kubro for its stock mod that grants you invisibility when there are enemies present within 24 meters. This is great to get rid of some enemy aggression, but do remember that the invisibility breaks when you perform a heavy attack with your hammer. The same goes when you are performing a slam attack with your Exalted Blade. Basically, it just gives you another layer of survivability, and it's not a one-trick setup that fixes all your survivability problems. Finally, another damage boosting trick that you should know for this synergy is equipping the Magus Aggress Arcane in your operator. What this Arcane basically does is provide plus 300% critical damage boost to heavy swords. However, thanks to some spaghetti coding, Magus Aggress don't just work on heavy swords but also hammers, and in most cases, this synergy is busted with the Incarnon Magistar, the Arcatitron, and the Sampo's Hammer as your melee weapon. I have included the builds for all these hammers close to the end of this video. Just check the timeline for guidance as I don't want to disrupt the flow of how I explain things in this guide. For now, let's move on to the Exalted Blade version of this combo. Before we do, I would like to say that Magus Aggress don't work with the Exalted Blade setup, and we will need to tweak our build for a bit to gain more damage buff without the plus 300% critical damage bonus. The same mod setup can be used in Excalibur, but instead of range, we will be adding the Chromatic Blade Augment. This will give us more than 100% status chance and an element that corresponds to the color we choose on Excalibur's emissive pattern. For example, I choose a bluish color which gives me electric damage, and this will combine with Prime Fever Strike to form corrosive damage. To further increase the damage of a slammed Exalted Blade, I strongly recommend equipping Condition Overload over Prime Pressure Point. Then, I recommend building a Hound with these components. The goal here is to equip the Synergize Prospectus mod that triggers electric damage and spreads statuses to enemies. Also, Manifold Ban is a must-have for this, so your Hound can abuse casting Synergized Prospectus and spread statuses frequently. And since this is a melee synergy, it's great to have Prime Pack Leader to provide overguard to your Hound and give it insane survivability. Do take note that this Condition Overload setup can be used also in your Hammer builds. I just added an Exalted variant for this synergy, not only to get out of the Hammer meta, but also because other players might not have the Incarnon Magistar or other hammers yet. However, also take note that with Exalted Blade, your energy consumption will be massive, especially that we have Blind Rage in our build. The best way to counter this is to have Arcane energized in one of your Arcane slot, and as well as add Blue Archon shards for maximum energy. Finally, this build is future-proof in the upcoming March update, as Digital Extremes announced that the Exalted weapons will have Riven mods, and they will allow the usage of Arcanes and as well as other mods such as Blood Rush in Exalted weapons. This only means that melee influence setup will be super busted with an Exalted Blade Slam Excalibur. Aside from that, I'm not really excited with the Exalted weapons Riven mods, as they will definitely have low Riven disposition. The same goes with Acolyte mods, as Blood Rush won't be necessary for this build given that you can also subsume Wrathful Advance. The only problem though is that melee influence setup is kind of tricky with an Exalted Excalibur, as the element you have in Exalted Blade combines with the element you get from Chromatic Blade. Also, it seems that the Diriga Sentinel trick wherein you can use Arc Coil Mod to activate the melee influence effect doesn't work anymore. And the best option you will have is modding for Shocking Touch in your Exalted weapon instead of Prime Fever Strike. There's another method to make this viable, and that is by subsuming Volt's shock ability and using the Shock Trooper augment. The electric damage coming from the augment won't combine with the toxin we have from Prime Fever Strike, but this means that we need to use another mod slot intended for Volt's augment. This is the only way to maintain the high damage Lamb Prime Fever Strike unless we get something new to proc melee influence in the March update. Nonetheless, I am still very excited on this Excalibur build once the new update arrives. So that's all about it. Now go try out this new build combo for Excalibur. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you again in our next video. Squad Leader signing off.